Welcome to Healing Childhood Trauma, the podcast for millennial women who are ready to heal from the past. Here, we have the deeper discussions on emotional well-being and practical tips that will empower you to transform your relationships and underlying anxiety from insecure to secure attachment. I'm Lysandra, your host and psychotherapist. I'm a little bit obsessed with human development, deep conversations, and finding the lesson even in the most challenging of circumstances. I'm very happy to have you with me on this journey of self-discovery where we unpack the past and heal in the present. I felt called today to record an episode about abandonment. When we think of abandonment, we think of it as sometimes physically being left somewhere, being forgotten, being dismissed, being discarded. And if abandonment is really a deep core wound for you, it is something that you have experienced through foster care or adoption, or the loss of a parent, emotional neglect, however that might connect to you, I would say to just be mindful about this episode and to just be gentle with yourself. And I suppose just check in with yourself if now is the right time for you to hear this. And if you are in a space to perhaps nurture yourself after listening to this, if that's something that you need, if you're aware of abandonment being part of your story. But sometimes what can also happen is we're not always even consciously aware that abandonment is a part of our story. It's sometimes not until it is named for us that we recognize, oh, yeah, that was a form of abandonment. And that does tie into whether it's childhood experiences or previous relationships or previous friendships or other ways that somehow relationally you have been let down. That's also another invitation for you to just be more gentle with yourself and patient and kind and nurturing with yourself, because that is really what we need when we have experienced abandonment. If this is your first time listening to me, welcome. I'm Lysandra and I'm a psychotherapist and I'm also a relationship therapist, and I work around a lot of childhood trauma and relational trauma, and I've been a therapist for over 10 years, working with individuals and also working with couples to understand their relationship patterns, to have healthier relationships and to feel more secure in themselves, so that translates into their relationships and into their parenting and how they show up in work and life. Abandonment focuses a lot on relationship behaviours, so things around clinginess, over-texting, needing a lot of reassurance, and it's really connected quite strongly with an anxious attachment. And yes, it's true, that is one of the deep-rooted fears or one of the deep-rooted patterns that happen within anxious attachment, because the thing that people with anxious or more anxious attachment patterning tend to fear is that feeling of abandonment that they've experienced before. And so that comes out in a lot of their relationship behaviours, in how they sometimes almost can suffocate their partners by wanting too much from them and not giving them space, not really having trust in the relationship or trusting their behaviours, or even when they are being given that reassurance of like, I'm into this, I'm committed to you, I'm not going anywhere. Sometimes just the words themselves are not enough because of the past that they've experienced and the amount of times they've had inconsistencies in their care where someone has supposedly said that before but has let them down in either a catastrophic significant way, or it's just been a series of events over time. It doesn't mean that those events have been these huge massive things. Sometimes it's also the subtle ways that we are abandoned, that we notice when someone is distancing themselves or withdrawing, and we can feel that something about the relationship feels uncertain. And that often comes from a place of you've experienced that before, and that's why it feels so intense and why it feels so familiar and scary, because you have experienced some kind of form of abandonment in the past, which is why it's like a trigger for you, because triggers are essentially something that we've already experienced. It's a trigger because it's already happened to us before and it makes us uncomfortable, and then it brings up this very strong physical and emotional reaction. So we don't get this really strong emotional physical reaction just from something happening to us one time and we've never had no version of it happen to us before. it's usually about a re-experiencing or something that feels familiar, which is then what actually causes it to feel like a trigger. So abandonment in itself isn't just the act of someone leaving. It's also about what happens within you when you can actually feel someone starting to withdraw or disconnect from you. Some smaller moments of abandonment can feel like somebody taking too long to text back, for example, or someone cancelling plans at the last minute, or your partner being emotionally distant. It's how the body remembers that early disconnection, even when your adult mind tries to rationalize it. And abandonment doesn't always look like neediness. So I've spoken about it in the sense of anxious attachment, but abandonment is also at the cause of a lot of insecure attachment patterning. So it also shows up a lot in avoidant attachment patterns as well, and dismissive avoidant attachment patterns. One way in terms of avoidant patterning that it can show up is through hyper-independence and not wanting to rely on anyone and finding it very difficult to ask for help, because at the root cause of that is a fear of abandonment. And because you have experienced abandonment before, where perhaps you might have needed something, whether it is something physical or emotional, and you just haven't had that need met. You've looked out for support, you've needed something, either from a parent, a caregiver, a relationship, and you've actually been left to kind of figure it out on your own. And I'm not just talking about it's happened like as a one-off, it's something that happens consistently over time. So if you've consistently been let down and felt like you have to just figure it out on your own because no one's coming to save you, that's a form of abandonment that you've experienced. When you start to develop things around hyper-independence and not needing anyone, that avoidance is about, well, if I don't need anyone, then I can't be hurt by anyone. I can't be let down by anyone. And so the root cause of that is the abandonment. And there's all different types of abandonment that we can receive in childhood. We can have parents who are not emotionally attuned to us because they are not very emotionally intelligent, or they don't value emotions. They don't really do feelings. They just focus on what they provide for you financially. So you have a roof over your head, you have food in your belly, I get you to school, I take you to clubs, anything that you want financially, you've got that. But there isn't emotional support. There isn't any talk about how you might be feeling, or there isn't any support around if you're going through something difficult. How do you talk that through? It's almost like you're just there for the functioning of the day-to-day, but the depth of the relationship is very superficial and very surface level. And so if you are going through difficult times, maybe bouts of like low mood, for example, or just not feeling good enough, not feeling like you fit in, or going through, body image struggles, whatever the thing is that you might be struggling with as either a child or as an adolescent growing up, you don't have anyone to talk about that to, or it just feels like if you try and talk about how you feel, it's like dismissed as, well, what are you complaining about? Like you've got everything that you want. We live in a nice house. I've bought you the latest computer game, paid to get your hair done, your nails done. All of these things that are, they might mean something. As children, we can be quite, materialistic about wanting certain things and wanting to fit in with what our friends have and what people around us have. But there's also sometimes a misalignment with like being emotionally connected or feeling emotionally connected. If we never talk about anything more than, oh, how was your day? Fine. What did you do at school today? Nothing. Like everything is just very surface level. Nothing goes much deeper. Deeper discussions and emotions are not really nurtured. It's not because a parent doesn't care necessarily. It just might be that your parent just doesn't think in that way. And if you are listening to this as a millennial, feelings and emotional intelligence and connection, that just wasn't the priority for boomers of that generation. So people who are of a different time, that just wasn't important for them. And boy, are we feeling the result of that now. And so are they. Your parents can be very loving. You might not want for anything physically, and they might be very present, as in they are there in the home. And you know that if you need something, that you can talk to them. But at the same time, if you really needed something and you were in a crisis, they wouldn't necessarily be the person that you turn to, because perhaps they either make you feel worse, or maybe they are just very anxiety prone, that when you do talk about something, they almost go into a panic, and it just makes the situation and it makes you feel worse. And when there is that misalignment with tuning into actually what someone needs, whether it is actual support or someone just to listen or to reassure or to validate, because all of those things can be enough, but it's when you don't receive enough of that or any of that, or it's just not the thing that you need, those forms of abandonment is also what causes potentially the hyper independence and the need to have everything figured out by yourself and to not need emotional support or physical support or financial support from anybody else, because you've had to figure it out on your own in the past. And if you don't do it, like, no one is coming to save you. Then there's the term of parentification. And I don't know if you're familiar with this term before, but it is essentially when the roles in the family are almost reversed. And it's where the child becomes the caretaker for the adult. And what that is, that's an early abandonment of themselves in order to take on the position of adult, because basically they do not feel supported enough from the adult in their life. And sometimes that is done out of, maybe the parent has like a mental health issue or issues around alcoholism or physical disability. So sometimes it's not even something that can always be helped, or it's not always something that is intentional. Sometimes the child does need to become the caretaker, but what that also means is that it's harder for them to build a secure attachment or to have a secure attachment figure in that sense, because they are the one who has to take responsibility and care. And when a child becomes the caretaker, that's a form of abandonment, because although their parent might be there physically in the home, they are not providing the support that that child needs to thrive through nurture, through care, through presence, through protection. So it is also a form of emotional neglect. And sometimes it can be praised in childhood if a child is very responsible and takes care of their parent, because it's almost like, look at how responsible he or she is, look how responsible and thoughtful she is. But maybe she has to be responsible because she doesn't have a choice. Because if she's not responsible, then maybe they don't get fed, maybe they don't get looked after, maybe their siblings don't get to school, maybe their parent can't get out of bed unless they're there to support them. And it might not seem like it's an abandonment because that parent is still physically in the house, but they're not a secure attachment figure for that child. And that in itself is a very deep wound of abandonment. And then with inconsistency with your parent showing up, when it's not consistent, that's where those forms of abandonment can also come up. So on one hand, your parent might be there for you emotionally, and they might be a good parent in the sense of taking care of you and making sure that you're well fed, and also at the same time being very loving towards you. Sometimes in childhood, we can be abandoned by our parents making poor choices about either their relationships or the relationships that they decide to stay in, or having small senses of abandonment because they're trying to provide for the family, and in trying to provide for the family, it means that they have to work a lot of long hours. That's where it's really heartbreaking, because sometimes the abandonment that we experience isn't actually the fault of our parents, or there's no one person we can blame. It's something that's systemic. And actually, your parents did the best that they could with the resources they had and the time that they had. So the abandonment and the feelings that we have around abandonment isn't that it's always something that happens that is intentional, or it's about somebody physically leaving. Sometimes we also experience abandonment from our parents who have actually been there, but for some reason or another, they couldn't be fully present because they needed to put food on the table, or they were a single parent, or they were low income earners, or they didn't have a village, they didn't have a community who could offer support. And so they were doing the role of the village all by themselves. And so when that sense of abandonment comes up, that can make it somewhat tricky, because there's also a feeling that might come up of just feeling guilty that you might have experienced abandonment as well, or that you feel like you didn't get enough of what you wanted, even though you could see how hard your parent was trying and how much they wanted to be able to be there for you. But for some reason, they just couldn't be, battling their own demons. And although we can be abandoned, and those first experiences of abandonment usually occur in childhood, when that starts to repeat in our relationships, so romantic relationships, we can end up picking and choosing the same kind of partners that mirror those early experiences that we've had with our parents. So if we have a parent who is emotionally avoidant or dismissive, that's something that feels familiar. And that's quite often how we end up in relationships with people who also have that same presentation in relationships. And it might not be very obvious at first. It might seem like they are completely different, or you might not make any connection that they have any similarities to what you've experienced in the past. But if you find yourself getting triggered a lot, feeling misunderstood a lot, not feeling seen in your relationship, feeling like you're constantly having to ask for more, or you're having to explain how to be loved, it's probably because you are re-experiencing those abandonment wounds that you've had before, and it's coming out again now in your current relationship. If it's something that we haven't worked through, it's almost like we try to re-experience it because we're trying to get over that relationship. We're trying to find a way to heal. And so if we don't, that's what keeps us stuck in those same patterns and those same dysfunctional relationships. We might experience abandonment from others, but it's also about self-abandonment. We then start to self-abandon our own needs because maybe we tell ourselves that what we're asking for is too much, or that we don't feel like we're good enough, or that we're worthy enough, or we don't feel like it's okay to ask for certain things in relationships. We don't know if we're being too demanding or that we're asking for too much. And so you can start to suppress speaking up and abandon yourself by thinking, maybe it's not okay to ask for these things. Maybe it's not okay to want more for myself. It doesn't just apply to relationships. It applies to any kind of form of self-abandonment. And self-abandonment comes up in so many different forms, but it's when you're constantly prioritizing everyone and everything above you. And it's about the subtle ways that sometimes you tell yourself that you don't matter by dropping your self-care. Because if something else comes up, that takes priority. Feeling guilty for resting, not investing in yourself, not listening to your body when your body needs rest, not connecting in your friendships and your relationships, isolating when you feel down. All of these things are different forms of self-abandonment. So try not to think of abandonment as just someone physically leaving. It's also that feeling of I'm not important enough. And sometimes that's the deeper rooted feeling of abandonment that many of us are walking around with that we don't address. And the root of abandonment is working out where the connection has been lost. And if you want to repair some of that, I think that's a really good place to start, especially when it starts showing up in your everyday life. It's noticing when the connection feels lost. And where connection has been lost, it also can be rebuilt in your relationships, but also I think when it comes to attachment, most importantly, that relationship that you have with yourself. So if you stop self-abandoning what you need and start focusing on meeting your needs, but before you do that, you have to actually identify what your needs are. And that can be really hard to do if you've never really thought about it, or you're so busy being the fixer or the helper for everyone else. But maybe this is your invitation to think about, well, what is it that I need? And it doesn't have to be on a very deep level of what's my perfect relationship or what do I want to make out of my life? Like, those are very big, deep questions, okay? Maybe it's just starting with, well, what do I need today? What do I need in this moment? What do I need in the next 5 minutes? And it's just changing the story for that so that you are positioning yourself as someone who is important and someone that's worth, one, taking care of, and two, thinking about. Because quite often when you've experienced abandonment, it's that feeling of, I'm not important. And we feel like we're not important when we're not being seen, we're not being thought about, we're not being considered. If you want some help with things around abandonment and relationship patterns and attachment, go and have a look in the show notes of this episode. I will post some resources in there for you. You can grab my free guide, which is the ultimate guide to secure relationships. It's also got some exercises on there as well. I have other episodes that talk around this area as well. So you can also listen to some previous episodes to help you on this, or get in touch if you want to work with me one-to-one. I work with clients in the UK and EU for one-to-one therapy. And for people who are in other parts of the world, I do workshops and coaching programs around attachment and attachment healing. So those are just a few options for you. Okay, catch you in the next episode. Bye. Thank you for joining this episode of Healing Childhood Trauma. I hope you found today's discussion insightful and empowering. Remember, healing is a journey and you are not alone on this path. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favourite podcast platform. And you can share this episode with a friend. Your feedback helps this podcast to reach more women who are ready to heal and build secure, healthy relationships and heal from the past.